Huainanzi Chapter 8, The Basic Warp. The reign of grand purity one was harmonious and compliant and thus silent and indifferent, substantial and true and thus plain and simple, contained and tranquil, it was not intemperate, exerting and shifting, it followed no precedents. Inwardly it accorded with the way, outwardly it conformed to rightness. When stirred into motion, it formed normative patterns, when moving at full speed, it was well matched to things. Its words were concise and in step with reason, its actions were simple and in compliance with feelings. Its heart was harmonious and not feigned, its conduct of affairs was simple and not ostentatious. That being so, there was no selecting of auspicious times and days, no divining by trigrams or shell cracking, no scheming about where to begin, no discussion of where to end. When tranquil, it stopped, when roused, it moved. It was of one body with heaven and earth, two and one essence with yin and yang. In its oneness it accorded with the four seasons, in its brightness it shone as the sun and the moon. As one with what fashions and transforms us, it was both female and male. That being so, heaven overspread it with potency, earth upheld it with music. The four seasons did not lose their order, wind and rain did not descend with violence. The sun and moon, with purity and clarity, spread their radiance, the five planets held to their paths and did not fail in their movements. At that time, the mysterious origin came to brightness and shed its brilliance all around. The phoenix and the kylin arrived, the milfoil and the tortoise gave omens. Sweet dew descended. Bamboo produced abundant shoots, flowing yellow three emerged from the ground, vermilion grass grew. Contrivances and falsehoods were not harbored in people's minds. Coming down to the age of decline, people delved in mountains for precious stones. They engraved metal and carved jade, pried open oysters and clams to get pearls, smelted bronze and iron, and the myriad things were not nurtured thereby. People ripped open pregnant animals and killed young ones, so the kylin no longer wandered abroad. They overturned nests and broke eggs, so the phoenix no longer soared. They bored wood to get fire, cut timber to build terraces, burned forests to make fields, drained marshes to catch fish, so tortoises and dragons no longer frequented the earth. Nevertheless, the implements of the common people were insufficient, while the hoarded treasures of the rich were excessive. Thus among the myriad things, more often than not, calamities damaged sprouts and shoots and eggs, and pregnancies failed to reach fruition. People piled up earth so as to live on hills, manured their fields to plant grain, dug into the earth to make wells for drinking, channeled streams to improve their usefulness, pounded earth into walls to make fortifications, captured wild animals to domesticate them. Thus yin and yang became twisted and tangled, the four seasons lost their proper order, thunderclaps caused things to overturn and break, hailstones fell violently, noxious vapors descended and did not disperse, and the myriad things suffered premature deaths. People cleared fields that were overgrown and weedy to consolidate and enclose acreage, they mowed open lands and thickets so as to grow seedlings and sprouting grain, and there were innumerable instances of misshapen shoots, unblossoming flowers, and pendant fruit that died in an untimely way. So things reached the stage when people built great mansions, houses, and palaces, with linked rooms and ranks of pillars with jointed eaves and rafter ends, all patterned, polished, carved, and graven, with twisting and trailing caltrop branches, with hibiscus and lotus. The five colors vying with one another, flowing together or standing apart. All was smoothly contrived with great craft, bent and contorted and doubled into knots, minutely fussed over with great pains, all in accordance with instructions, so that even legendary artisans like Gong Shifor and Wang Er would have found no fault with the chiseling and graving, the carving and scroll work. Yet even this did not suffice to fill the desires of the rulers of men. Thus the pine, the cypress, and the flowering bamboo five drooped and rotted in the summertime, the Yangtze, the Yellow River, and the three streams became exhausted and ceased flowing. Foreigners' sheep flocked in the meadows, flying locusts filled the open lands, heaven dried up and earth cracked open, the phoenix did not descend. Hook-clawed, bare-toothed, horn-bearing, marauding wild animals became even fiercer. The common people had only small reed huts for houses, with nowhere for travelers to find lodging. Those who died of cold and hunger lay as close together as pillows to mats. Then it came to pass that they divided mountains and streams, gorges and valleys, to make territories and boundaries. They counted the population to divide the masses of people by numbers. They pounded earth to make walls and dug moats. They set up military contrivances in defile and passes to prepare against attack. They created insignia for those who managed affairs, made regulations of clothing and rank, differentiated between noble and base, distinguished the worthy from those who were not, codified terms of disapprobation and praise, instituted rewards and punishments. That weapons and armor flourished, and contention and conflicts broke out, that the common people suffered extermination, repression, and disasters, that they were oppressively executed though guiltless, and suffered mutilating punishments though not guilty of crimes, was all due to this. 8/61/6, 27 8.2 The concord and harmony of heaven and earth, the transformations of yin and yang and the myriad things depend on one qi. 6 For this reason, when the hearts of high and low become estranged from each other, qi rises up like a vapor. When ruler and minister are not in harmony, the 5 grains do not yield a harvest. For 46 days after the winter solstice, 7 Heaven withholds its responses and does not yet descend, earth harbors its qi and does not yet scatter it abroad. Yin and yang are stored up together, exhaling and inhaling as if in deep water. They embrace and enfold all customs, deliberate on the myriad differences among things, set aside what is unsuitable and amass the seemly, thus together soaking and steeping, brewing and fermenting, they bring to completion the multitude of living things. For this reason, when things are stunted in spring and flourish in autumn, when there is thunder in winter and frost in summer, it all is generated by noxious qi. From this one can see that heaven and earth, space and time, are as the body of a single person, and everything within the 6 coordinates are as the shape of a single person. 8 For this reason, one who discerns the natures of things cannot be alarmed by anything in heaven or earth. One who investigates auspicious omens cannot be affected by strange phenomena. Thus the sage knows the far by means of the near, so that the myriad differentiations become unified. 8/62/1, 6 8.3 The people of antiquity made their qi the same as that of heaven and earth, they wandered in an era of unity. 9 At that time, there was no garnering advantage by praise and rewards, no intimidation by mutilations and punishments. Ritual and rightness, purity and modesty, had not yet been established, slander and flattery, humaneness and contempt, had not yet been set up, and the myriad peoples had not yet begun to treat one another with fraud and oppression. Cruelty and exploitation, it was as if they were still immersed in turbid obscurity. 10 Coming down to the era of decline, it transpired that people were abundant, but wealth was scarce, people labored to the utmost, but their nourishment was insufficient. Thus competition and strife were born, and humaneness was valued. The humane and the petty-minded were, however, not treated equitably. Neighbors formed groups, and friends formed cabals. They promoted falsehood and deceit, cherished a spirit of contrivance and artifice, and lost their natural tendencies. Thus rightness was valued. None of the people's feelings associated with yin and yang, i.e., sexual feelings, were free from the stimulation of blood and qi. Men and women therefore gathered in places and promiscuously dwelt together without distinction. Thus ritual was valued. Instinctive feelings overflowed and were mutually conflicting. They could not stop themselves and therefore were discordant. Thus music was valued. Thus, humaneness, rightness, ritual, and music, though able to save the world from ruin, are still not the perfection of comprehensive governance. Humaneness is able to save people from strife, rightness is able to save people from errors, ritual is able to save people from lewdness, music is able to save people from melancholy. When spirit illumination is established in the world, then minds revert to their original state. When minds revert to their original state, then people's natures become good. When people's natures become good, they are followed by heaven and earth and by yin and yang. Wealth then becomes sufficient. When wealth becomes sufficient, the people are respectful, covetousness, petty-mindedness, anger, and competition have no occasion to arise. From this one can see that under these circumstances there is no need for humaneness and rightness. When the way and its potency are established in the world, then the people become pure and simple. Thus their eyes are not fixed on beauty, their ears are not drawn to sounds. If there were entertainers sitting in rows and singing songs or prancing about with their hair hanging loose, even if they were as alluring as Mao Chiang or Shi Shi, the audience would take no pleasure in them, even if the tunes were Falling Wings or Martial. They would not find any joy in them. 11. Even if the lewdness had no limit, it would come to nothing. From this one can see that under these circumstances there is no need for ritual and music. Thus, when potency declines, humaneness is born. 12. When conduct fails, rightness is established. When harmony is lost, there are sounds and ditties. When rituals are decayed, comportment is gaudy. Thus, if one understands spirit illumination, then one can understand the inadequacy of the way and its potency for affecting things. If one understands the way and its potency, then one can understand the inadequacy of humaneness and rightness in putting things into practice. If one understands humaneness and rightness, then one can understand the inadequacy of ritual and music in regulating conduct. 8/62/6, 19:8.4. Now, people who turn their backs on the fundamental but seek it in the peripheral, or who wish to explain the essential but inquire into details, are not yet able to take part in discourses that reach the utmost. 8/62/19, 20. The size of heaven and earth may be known by means of the carpenter's square and the gnomon. The motions of the stars and the moon can be obtained from the calendar and from investigations. The sound of thunder can be approximated by means of drums and bells. The alterations of rain and wind can be known by means of the notes and the pitch pipes. Thus, if the size of a thing can be seen, it is possible to gauge its weight. If the brightness of a thing can be observed, it is possible to know its obscurities. If the sound of a thing can be heard, it is possible to know its melodies. If the colors of a thing can be examined, it is possible to distinguish among them. But as for the limit of vastness, heaven and earth cannot contain it. As for the limit of minuteness, spirit illumination cannot comprehend its fineness. When the time came that the pitch pipes and calendar were established, the 5 colors were distinguished, the tonic and flattened scales were differentiated, and sweet and bitter were distinguished as tastes, then it was that the unhewn block was shattered and made into implements. When humaneness and rightness were established and ritual and music were reformed, then potency was done away with, and the meretricious was brought into being. When the meretricious was born, fake wisdom was used to startle the ignorant, and clever deceptions were used to inveigle those in high positions. Thus in the world there were those who were able to manage things, but there was none who was capable of true rule. 8/62/22, 27. 8.5. In ancient times, when King Ju invented writing, heaven rained corn, and demons wept all night. When Bo Yi 13 invented wells, dragons ascended to the dark clouds, and the spirits fled to their abode on Kunlun. As wisdom and ability grew ever more abundant, potency grew ever more scarce. Thus on the Zhou tripods was cast a depiction of Chui 14 biting his fingers, signifying that great ingenuity is ultimately unable to accomplish anything. Therefore the rule of the perfected person is like this: his mind is coextensive with his spirit, his physical form is in tune with his nature. When he is still he embodies potency, when he acts, he patterns himself on penetration. He follows his spontaneous nature and aligns himself with inevitable transformations. He is profoundly non-active, and the world naturally becomes harmonious. He is tranquilly devoid of desires, and the people naturally become simple. He does not augur for good omens, so the people do not suffer calamities. He is not angry or contentious, so food supplies are sufficient. He unites and binds together all within the four seas, and the benefits reach to future generations, but none knows who it is who has done this. While he is alive, he has no cognomen. When he is dead, he has no posthumous title. He accumulates no wealth, so his fame is not established. When bestowing, he does not accumulate potency, and when receiving, he does not cede it. 15 Potency circulates and returns again to its source, and there is none who is not replete with it. So where potency is pervasive, the way cannot be harmed, what knowledge cannot understand, discrimination cannot explicate. Wordless discrimination, the way of no way, how can penetration get there? It is called heaven's storehouse. One can take from it without diminishing it, pour from it without exhausting it. No one knows from whence it comes. It is called Yaoguang. 16 Yaoguang is the wealth and provender of the myriad things. 8/62/27, 8/63/68.6 When the ruler relieves hardships and supplements insufficiencies, then his fame is born. When he upholds the beneficial and eliminates the harmful, when he chastises the disorderly and prohibits cruelty, then his merit is established. When an age is without calamity or harm, even a spirit would find no occasion to display his potency. When high and low are united in harmonious amity, even a worthy would have no occasion to show forth his merits. In antiquity, in the time of Rong Chen, 17 people walked along on the roads like geese in single file and arranged themselves in rows. They trustingly cradled their infants and children in birds' nests, and they put their surplus grain in mounds in the fields without it being stolen. They could grasp the tails of tigers and leopards and tread upon cobras and pythons and come to no harm. 18 But they did not understand how it came to be so. Coming down to the time of Yao, the 10 sons once came out together. They scorched the standing grain and the sheaves and killed herbs and trees, so that the people had nothing to eat. Moreover Chayu, 9 Gullet, Typhoon, Mound Pig, Chisel Tusk, and Long Snake all were causing the people harm. 19 Yao therefore commanded Yi the archer to slaughter Chisel Tusk in the water meadows of Chuhua, to kill 9 Gullet on the banks of the Xiong River, to shoot down Typhoon in the wilds of Green Hill, upward to shoot the 10 sons and downward to kill Chayu. To chop Long Snake in two at Dongting Lake, and to capture Mound Pig in Mulberry Forest. The multitudes of people all were happy and established Yao as son of heaven. And thus for the first time under heaven, there were roads and mileposts in the plains and canyons, in difficult passes and easy terrain, far and near. In the time of Shun, Gong Gong stirred up the torrents and unleashed floods of water, extending as far as Hollow Mulberry. The Dragon Gate Pass was not yet opened, and the Lu Berm had not yet been breached. The Yangtze and the Huai flowed as one, the four seas became a boundless expanse of water. The people all climbed hills and mounts and leaped into trees. Shan thereupon employed you to drain the 3 rivers and the 5 lakes and to tunnel through Yaju Mountain and make channels for the Chan and Jian rivers. He leveled the land and conducted the waters, leading them to flow into the eastern sea. The flooding waters flowed away, and the 9 provinces became dry again. The multitudes were at peace with their natures, and thus they considered Yao and Shun to be sages. Coming to the time of later generations, there were the emperors Ji and Zhao. Ji built the revolving palace and the jade terrace, with porches of ivory and bedsteads of jade. Zhao made a forest of meat and a lake of wine. He gathered for his own use all the wealth of the world and exhausted in bitterness the labor of the multitudes. He cut open and extracted the heart of a minister who remonstrated and ripped open a pregnant woman to expose her fetus. In these ways, Ji and Zhao plundered the world and ill-treated the people. Accordingly, then, Tang employed 300 war chariots to attack Ji south of Chao and imprisoned him at Xia Terrace. King Wu used 3,000 armored warriors to destroy Zhao at Muye, later executing him at Proclamation Hall. The world became peaceful and orderly, and the people came together harmoniously. Thus Tang and Wu were considered men of surpassing goodness. From this, one can see that if one is to acquire the reputation of a worthy or a sage, it is necessary to encounter the calamities of a disorderly age. 8/63/8, 21 Nowadays a perfected person who is born in the midst of a chaotic age, who internalizes potency, embraces the way, and is filled with inexhaustible wisdom, nevertheless must gag his mouth and stifle his speech. Consequently, there are many such who die without ever having spoken, and under heaven, no one even knows to honor this not speaking. Thus the way that can be called the way is not the enduring way, names that can be named are not enduring names. 20 Words written on bamboo or silk or engraved in metal or stone, so as to be passed down to later people, are only the rough equivalents. The 5 Thearchs 21 and 3 Kings 22 had different affairs but the same intentions, different roads but the same destinations. 23 But the scholars of later times know nothing about how to form one body with the way or how to comprehensively epitomize its potency. They merely take up the track of things that have already been done. They sit facing one another with a dignified air and talk about it. 24 They drum, chant, and express themselves in dance. But despite their broad studies and extensive instruction, they still do not avoid being deluded. It is as the Ode says, one does not dare to attack a tiger bare-handed, one does not dare to cross the Yellow River without a boat. Everyone knows this, but no one knows anything else. 25 8/62/23, 8/64/3 8.7 The Thearch embodies the Grand One, the king emulates yin and yang, the hegemon follows the 4 seasons, the prince uses the 6 pitch pipes. 26 Now the Grand One encloses and contains heaven and earth, weighs on and crushes the mountains and streams, retains or emits yin and yang, stretches out and drags along the 4 seasons, knots the net of the 8 directional endpoints, and weaves the web of the 6 coordinates. It renews the dew and universally overflows without partiality, it causes the waterflies to fly and wriggling things to move, there is nothing that does not rely on it and its potency in order to live. Yin and yang uphold the harmony of heaven and earth and shape the physical forms of the myriad diversities. They retain qi and transform things in order to bring to completion the kinds of the myriad categories. They stretch out and draw back, roll up, and uncoil. 27 They sink into the unfathomable, end and begin again in emptiness and fullness, revolving in the without origin. The 4 seasons, spring birth, summer growth, autumn harvest, winter storage. For obtaining and bestowing, there are times, for going out and entering, there are measures. Opening and closing, expanding and contracting, they do not deviate from their proper order, happiness and anger, hardness and pliancy, do not depart from their principles. The 6 pitch pipes are life and death, reward and punishment, granting and taking away. Anything that is otherwise lacks the way. Therefore pay heed to the balance beam and weight, the level and the marking cord. 28 Examine into the light and the heavy. This is sufficient to govern within the boundaries of a state. 8/64/5, 11 Therefore one who embodies the Grand One discerns the true responses of heaven and earth. 29 And penetrates the regularities of the way and its potency. His comprehensive brilliance bedazzles like the sun and moon, his essence and spirit penetrate the myriad things. His motion and rest are in tune with yin and yang, his happiness and anger harmonize with the 4 seasons, his moral potency and magnanimity extend to beyond the borderlands, and his fame and reputation pass down to later generations. One who emulates yin and yang has potency comparable to heaven and earth and brilliance like that of the sun and moon, his essence is as comprehensive as that of ghosts and spirits. He wears roundness as a hat and squareness as shoes. 30 He embraces the gnomon and holds fast to the marking cord. Within, he is able to govern his person, without, he is able to win people's minds. When he promulgates edicts and issues commands, there is no one in the world who does not comply with them. One who follows the 4 seasons is pliant but not fragile, hard but not brittle, lenient but not reckless, demanding but not overbearing. He is liberal, pliant, responsible, and indulgent in his nourishing the multitudes of creatures. In his moral potency he is magnanimous to the simple-minded and forgiving of the deviant. He is devoid of partiality. One who uses the 6 pitch pipes quells disorder and prohibits violence, advances the meritorious and demotes the unworthy. He supports the reliable so as to create order, he drives away the treacherous in order to create peace, he straightens out the bent in order to create uprightness. He discerns the way of prohibitions and pardons, openings and closings. He relies on timeliness and utilizes the power of circumstance in order to win over the hearts of the people. If a thearch merely embodies yin and yang, his throne will be usurped. If a king merely models himself on the 4 seasons, his territory will be seized. If a hegemon merely regulates himself by the 6 standards, he will be disgraced. If a prince neglects the level and the marking cord, he will be eradicated. If a person of small standing carries out great affairs, the results will be turbulent, insubstantial, and ungenial. If a great person carries out petty matters, the results will be narrow, cramped, and unpleasing. If honorable and mean do not lose their proper embodiments, then the world will be properly governed. 8/64/11, 21 8.8 Heaven loves its own essence, earth loves its own properties, people love their own instinctive responses. Heaven's essential qualities are the sun, moon, stars, planets, thunder, lightning, wind, and rain. Earth's properties are water, fire, metal, wood, and earth. People's instinctive responses are thought, forethought, comprehensiveness of hearing, clarity of sight, happiness, and anger. Thus if one closes the 4 gates of perception 31 and puts an end to the 5 extravagances, then one will be immersed in the way. Therefore when spirit illumination is stored up in the formless, and the quintessential chi reverts to ultimate genuineness, then the eyes are clear, but they are not used for seeing, and the ears are comprehensive, but they are not used for hearing, the mouth is apt, but it is not used for speaking, and the heart is orderly and penetrating, but is not used for thinking and planning. Under such circumstances there are responsibilities but no intentional action, harmonious actions but no boastfulness. There is a true expression of the instinctive responses invoked by the ruler's nature and life circumstances, so that wisdom and precedent are unable to confuse him. When the vital essence flows to the eye, vision is clear, when it is present in the ear, hearing is comprehensive, when it resides in the mouth, speech is apt, when it collects in the heart, its feelings are appropriate. So when one shuts the 4 gates, in the end, the body suffers no adversity, the 100 joints have no diseases. There is neither death nor birth, neither vacuity nor repletion. This is what is called the genuine person. 8/64/23, 28 8.9 Generally speaking, disorder arises from profligate indolence. The sources of profligate indolence are 5-fold: erecting great roof beams and framing timbers, building palaces and halls, courtyard buildings, storied towers, and covered walkways, aviaries and well houses, with pillars and planks of fruitwood, all joined together in mutual support, masterpieces of skillful carpentry, carved into twists and coils, overflowingly engraved and carved and polished, adorned with peculiar patterns and spiraling waves, with ornamentation dripping, floating, billowing, subsiding, water chestnut and dwarf oak twining and enfolding, extensive, profuse, disordered, fecund, cleverly artificial, joined together in apparent confusion, each effect exceeding the last. Such is profligate indolence based on wood. The depths of excavated ponds and lakes, the distance of aligned dikes and embankments, the flow of diverted streams through gorges and valleys, the straightness of ornamental zigzag channels, the piling up of stone slabs and the strewing about of stones in order to make borders and set out stepping stones, the placing of barriers and dampers in the furious rapids so as to stir up the surging waves, the making of angles and riffles, bends, and meanders to imitate the rivers of Fanyu and Kangwu, the augmenting of lotus and water chestnut plantings so as to feed turtles and fish, swans, geese, kingfishers, fed with leftover rice and sorghum, dragon boats with prows carved like water birds. Wafted along by the breeze for pure pleasure, such is profligate indolence based on water. High-pounded earth city walls and fortifications, plantings of trees as barriers in passes and defile, the impressiveness of lofty belvederes and observation posts, the immensity of extravagant gardens and walled parks, the sight of which satisfies every desire and wonder. The height of lofty gate towers that ascend to the clouds and blue sky, great mansions rising tier upon tier, rivaling the height of Kunlun, the construction of barrier walls and enclosures, the making of networks of roads, the leveling of highlands and filling in of depressions. The piling up of earth to make mountains, for the sake of easy passage to great distances, the straightening of roads through flatlands and hills, so that drivers may ceaselessly gallop and race without fear of stumbles or falls, such is profligate indolence based on earth. Great bells and tripods, beautiful and heavy implements, engraved all over with floral and reptilian designs, all twisting and intertwined, with recumbent rhinos and crouching tigers, coiling dragons interlacing together, blazingly bright and confusingly contrived, shiningly dazzling, brilliantly glittering, topsy-turvy, convoluted, luxuriant, tangled, with overall fretwork and written inscriptions, with engraved and polished ornamentation, cast tin alloy decorated mirrors, now dark, now bright, rubbed minutely, every flaw removed, frost patterns and deep-cut inlay work, resembling bamboo mottwork, basketry, or netting, or brocade wrappings, regular or irregular, the lines numerous but each one distinct, such is profligate indolence based on metal. Frying, boiling, roasting, grilling, the quest to blend, equalize, and harmonize flavors, trying to capture every permutation of sweet and sour in the manner of Jing and Wu, burning down forests in order to hunt, stoking kills with entire logs, blowing through 2 years and puffing with bellows in order to melt bronze and iron that extravagantly flow to harden in the mold, not considering an entire day sufficient to the task. The mountains are denuded of towering trees, the forests are stripped of cadrania and catalpa trees, tree trunks are baked to make charcoal, grass is burned to make ash, so that open fields and grasslands are white and bare and do not yield vegetation in season. Above, the heavens are obscured by smoke, below, the fruits of the earth are extinguished, such is profligate indolence based on fire. Of these 5, even one is sufficient for a ruler to lose control of the world. For this reason, in ancient times the making of the Mingtang was such that below, mud and dampness should not rise up in the walls, above, drizzle and fog should not enter into the building, and on all 4 sides, the wind should not come in. The earthen walls were not patterned, the woodwork was not carved, the metal fittings were not ornamented. Clothing was made with untrimmed corners and seams, hats were designed without fancy corners and folds. The Mingtang was sufficiently large for the movement of those who arranged the liturgies, it was sufficiently quiet and clean for sacrifices to the high gods and for ceremonies directed at the spirits and deities. This was to show forth to the people knowledge, simplicity, and economy. 8/65/1, 19:8.10 Now, sounds, colors, and the 5 flavors, precious and strange things from distant countries, things that are extraordinary, different, and surprising are enough to cause alterations and changes in the heart and will, to agitate and unsettle one's essence and spirit, and to stir up the blood and the chi so that it becomes impossible to keep control of them. Now, the ways in which heaven and earth bring forth their products do not basically exceed 5. The sage adheres to the 5 modes of conduct, 32, and thus his government does not become disordered. As a general rule, human nature is such that when the heart is harmonious and desires are obtained, there is joy. Joy gives rise to movement, movement gives rise to stepping about gives rise to agitation, agitation gives rise to singing, singing gives rise to dancing. If there is dancing, even animals and birds will jump about. 33 Human nature is such that when the heart harbors sorrow or mourning, there is grief. Grief gives rise to lamentation, lamentation gives rise to aroused feelings give rise to anger, anger gives rise to movement. 34 Movement causes the hands and feet to be restless. Human nature is such that when the heart harbors feelings of being encroached upon or insulted, there is anger. With anger, the blood becomes replete. When the blood becomes replete, chi is aroused. When chi is aroused, anger is manifested externally. When anger is manifested externally, there is some release of feelings. Thus, bells and drums, flutes and panpipes, shields and war hatchets, feather plumes and oxtail banners, all are means to express joy. Unfinished hempen garments, unbleached headcloths, and mourners' staffs, and weeping, thrashing about, and restraints on conduct, all are means to express sorrow. Weapons and leather armor, feather plumes and oxtail banners, metal drums, battle axes, and pole axes, all are means to express anger. First there must be the inner substance of the emotion, then one can make an outward expression of it. 8/65/21, 8/66/48.11 In ancient times, when the sage kings occupied the throne, governance and instruction were equitable, humaneness and love were harmoniously blended. 35 High and low were of one mind, ruler and minister were friendly and in accord with each other. Clothing and food were in surplus, families supplied people with the necessities. Fathers were compassionate and sons were filial, older brothers were nurturing and younger brothers compliant. In life there was no resentment, in death there was no regret. The world was harmonious and in concord, and the people obtained what they desired. People were happy with one another but without the means to give expression to this happiness and bestow it on one another. Therefore the sages devised ritual and music for them so as to harmonize and regulate them. In the government of later ages, hunting and fishing were heavily taxed, gate tolls and market fees were sharply increased, the use of wetlands and bridges was prevented and prohibited. There was no place to deploy nets and snares, no advantage to using mattock and plough. The people's strength was exhausted by corvée labor, their wealth and necessities were depleted in order to pay taxes. Residents had nothing to eat, travelers had no provisions, the old were not nurtured, the dead were not buried. Wives were prostituted and children sold, in order to meet the demands of the higher UPS, but even so they were unable to satisfy them. Clueless common men and simple women all were left with their hearts in turmoil and flux and with their wills sick and sorrowful. Under such circumstances, to strike the great bells, to pound the resounding drums, to blow on pipes and mouth organs, to pluck chine and essie, would be to cast away the basis of music itself. 8/66/6, 12 In ancient times, the demands of those on high were light, and the people's needs were met. Princes bestowed their moral potency, ministers amply fulfilled their duty of loyalty. Fathers behaved compassionately, sons outdid themselves in filiality. Each attained the proper degree of love, and there were no feelings of resentment among them. The 3 years' mourning was not imposed by force, but it was accomplished nevertheless, so that people heard music but were not joyous, ate delicacies but did not find them sweet, they were mindful of thoughts of the deceased and were unable to leave off thinking about them. In later ages, habits were dissipated and customs grew depraved. Lusts and appetites proliferated, ritual and rightness were eradicated. Rulers and ministers deceived one another, fathers and sons distrusted one another. Anger and rancor filled every breast, thoughtful minds were entirely extinct. Those who wore mourning clothes and tied on unbleached headcloths fooled around and laughed in the midst of their mourning. Although they attained the full 3 years, they cast away the fundamental principle of mourning. 8/66/14, 17 In ancient times, the Son of Heaven had his royal domain, and the lords of the land each had the same domains as called for by their rank, each took care of his own portion, and none was permitted to usurp another. If there was one who did not follow the kingly way, who was cruel and oppressive to the masses, who fought over land and tried to usurp territory, who disrupted the government and violated prohibitions, who when summoned to the king's court would not come, who when given commands would not carry them out, who when forbidden things would not desist, who when admonished would not alter. Then the Son of Heaven raised an army and went forth to punish him, executing the prince, getting rid of his supporters, shutting his ancestral tombs, sacrificing at their altars of the soil, and then selecting by divination one of his sons or grandsons to replace him. But in later ages, rulers endeavored to enlarge their lands and encroach on the territory of others, forming alliances ceaselessly, raised armies for unrighteous causes and mounted punitive expeditions against the guiltless, killed innocent people and cut off the lineages of the former sages. Large countries set off to attack others, small countries built fortifications to defend themselves. Such rulers confiscated people's oxen and horses, took captive their sons and daughters, destroyed their ancestral temples, carried off their weighty treasures, so that streams of blood flowed for 1,000 li, and sun-bleached skeletons choked the wild lands. To satisfy the desires of greedy lords, this is not how armies should be managed. 8/66/1924 Now the purpose of armies is to punish cruelty, not to commit cruelties. The purpose of music is to bring forth concord in human relations, not to create licentiousness. The purpose of mourning is to bring about a consummation of grief, not to create what is meretricious. Thus, there is a way of serving close relations, and love is the principal means of serving them. There is substance in the rituals of attendance at court, and respect is its highest expression. There are rituals for the implementation of mourning, and grief is their principal quality. There are techniques for the use of arms, and rightness is their foundation. If the foundation is established, then the way can be implemented. If the foundation is harmed, then the way will be abandoned.